This is the Magic Treehouse Fact Tracker, Llamas and the Andes, a nonfiction companion to Magic Treehouse number 34, Late Lunch with Llamas, written by Mary Pope Osborne and Natalie Pope Boyce. Dear readers, in Late Lunch with Llamas, we rescued a baby llama named Cria, who belonged to a boy in the Andes Mountains. We learned a lot about llamas and the Andes. Did you know that the Andes are the second tallest mountain range in the world? They run through parts of South America for about 4,500 miles. Llamas have been an important part of life in the Andes for thousands of years. In fact, people in the Andes probably wouldn't have survived without them. Llamas carried heavy loads up and down the mountains for them and still do today. This is just one important way that llamas help them, but there are many, many more. So let's put on our hiking boots and head for the Andes. You won't believe all the fantastic sights you will see there. Jack and Annie. We're on page 13. Chapter 1, Llamas in the Andes. It's hard to think of the Andes Mountains without llamas. Llamas. People have raised them in these spectacular mountains for thousands of years. Today, llamas are all over the world, but millions still live high in the Andes. The Andes are a chain of mountains stretching along the western coast of South America. They cover about 4,500 miles through 7 countries: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela. The Andes began forming about 30 million years ago. They are the longest mountain range in the world, and in some places are over 400 miles wide. Except for the Himalayas, they are also the highest. These beautiful mountains have different kinds of weather and landforms. They are deep valleys, high deserts, flat plains, and snow-capped peaks. There are 3 major regions in the Andes. The southern section is in Argentina and Chile. The central Andes run through parts of Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. And the northern Andes are in Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. On page 14, you can see a map of South America and its countries. Let's see what Jack has to say. The tallest mountain in the chain is Aconcagua at 22,841 feet. Page 16. The Ojos del Salado is over 22,000 feet high and is one of 150 active volcanoes in the Andes. Thank you for that, Annie. The southern region is rainy and cool, but central region is dry. There's rain in the north, but because it's closer to the equator, the temperatures there are warm. Glaciers. The Andes have deserts, but they also have glaciers. Some on the border of Argentina and Chile look like icy rivers. For thousands of years, the glaciers have inched down the mountains, carving out valleys and high, flat plains as they go. Let's see what Jack has to say. Plains like this one in Peru are large, flat areas of land. The Nile in Africa is the only river that is longer than the Amazon. Thank you for that, Annie. Every year, water from the glaciers flow east into the Amazon River. The river begins high in the mountains of Peru and runs over 4,000 miles through the Amazon rainforest into the Atlantic Ocean. Cloud forests. There are rainforests in the Andes. And high in the mountains of Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru are cloud forests, where the trees are always covered in clouds. Cloud forests form when warm, wet air from the Amazon rainforest moves up the mountains. The air cools as it gets higher and then condenses or changes into clouds. Trees in a misty cloud forest look like something from a fairy tale. Drops of water called fog drip trickle down to the ground from the leaves. The earth is so damp that soft mosses thrive on the dark forest floor. Let's see what Jack has to say on page 19 at the top. This cloud forest is part of Machu National Park in Peru. Plants and animals of the cloud forest. Many unusual animals and plants live in the Andean cloud forests. People have spotted over 300 different kinds of birds. Jack says, "Look at all the hummingbirds." Annie says, "There are more kinds of hummingbirds here than in any other place in the world." We're on page 20. Animals such as the spectacled bear, long-whiskered owlet, and the yellow-tailed woolly monkey are just some of the fascinating and rare creatures living in the cloud forests. Mountain tapirs are relatives of horses and rhinos. Thank you for that, Annie. We're on page 21. Different kinds of ferns, including tree ferns, are everywhere. Thousands of colorful orchids and many other plant species also thrive in this beautiful world of fog, trees, and waterfalls. Let's see what Jack has to say on the right. There are 200 different kinds of orchids in the cloud forests. Other plants in the Andes. There are 30,000 to 40,000 species of plants in the Andes. Cacti, orchids, and 21-foot aloe plants are just a few of them. Annie says malaria is a disease that causes high fever, chills, and sometimes death. It is carried by some mosquitoes. Jack says Folly Jones are in the sunflower family. The cinchona is a small but very important tree. People grind up its bark to make quinine, a medicine that treats people with malaria all over the world. They are strange and wonderful plants, like the Fraile Jones in Colombia. They look like small palm trees. And if you like ferns, there are 1,500 different kinds and 1,200 kinds of moss. Minerals. The Andes are rich in minerals. In fact, they have some of the largest deposits of copper, silver, tin, zinc, and gold in the world. The first explorers from Spain were there to mine for gold and other minerals. Spanish explorers arrived in the Andes in the early 1500s, says Annie. We're on page 24. Let's see what Jack and Annie have to say on the left. Jack says many of the mines are in the southern Andes. And Annie says air in the mountains has about 40% less oxygen. We're at the top of page 24. People are still mining today. Chile has the largest gold mines in South America. Experts think that there are at least 13,000 tons of gold yet to be found. Breathing in the thin air. Because the Andes are so high, breathing can be difficult. At above 8,000 feet, the air doesn't hold much oxygen. Gravity pulls the oxygen down toward the Earth's surface. Without enough oxygen, people can get headaches and feel very tired. They might be dizzy and sick to their stomachs. If they become short of breath, it's important to get to a lower altitude as soon as possible. At the top of page 25, Jack says, mountain climbers move slowly up the mountains so their bodies can adjust to the lack of oxygen. Native people in the Andes have adapted to handle the lack of oxygen. Their red blood cells are larger and hold more oxygen than most other people's. They have larger chests, hearts, and lungs so they can breathe more deeply. We're on page 26. Whales in the desert? The Atacama Desert lies along the western edge of the Andes. In 2011, men working on a road there uncovered some strange bones, a lot of them. Scientists visited the site and found they were the fossils of whales and other sea creatures. They were about 5 million years old. Researchers wanted to know how these fossils got so far from the ocean. They discovered that whole groups of animals probably died from eating toxic algae. Their dead bodies washed up on shore and lay buried in sand. Over the years, the bones became fossils. As the mountains grew higher, they pushed the fossils up about 130 feet, and they wound up in the Atacama Desert. Chapter 2, Llamas. Let's see what Annie has to say on the right on page 29. Today, relatives of these early camels live in Africa and Asia. Llamas are camelids, meaning they come from the camel family. Camelids first appeared in North America millions of years ago. About 2 million to 3 million years ago, some camelids crossed a land bridge that linked North America to Europe and Asia. As some camelids were crossing the land bridge, others began to make their way down to South America. Llamas, alpacas, guanacos, and vicuñas come from this group. The 4 camelids of the Andes. There are 4 kinds of camelids that live in the Andes: guanacos, vicuñas, llamas, and alpacas. They're all adapted to live high in the mountains. Their chests, hearts, and lungs are large. They have more red blood cells than other animals. Their thick coats keep them warm in the cold mountain air. Let's see what Jack has to say on the left. The vicuña is the national animal of Peru. Llamas and alpacas. Guanacos and vicuñas are wild animals, but over 6,000 years ago, people in the Andes began taming some of them. Over time, those became llamas and alpacas. Llamas come from guanacos, and alpacas come from vicuñas. People grew to depend on these animals for survival. Early people in the Andes had not yet invented the wheel. They carried things from one place to another on their backs. Some of them realized that they could train llamas as pack animals to carry their heavy loads. The native people made their clothes, blankets, ropes, and rugs from llama and alpaca wool. Their sturdy leather sandals came from llama hides. Llama and alpaca meat added protein to their diets. Let's see what Jack and Annie have to say on the right on page 31. Annie says, llamas can carry 50 to 75 pounds. Alpacas are not strong enough to carry heavy loads. People in South America still eat llama meat, says Jack. Now, let's look at this diagram that's on page 32 on the left. Now, at the top, we see a long banana-shaped ear. They have a strong back, long legs, feet with 2 toes, a large chest, and large eyes. Let's see what Annie has to say on the left. Llama fat was made into candles. Andeans dried llama and alpaca dung and burned it in fires for cooking and warmth. The dung also made excellent fertilizer that helped crops grow well in the poor mountain soil. Llama and alpaca dung is especially good fertilizer for growing corn at very high altitudes. How to spot a llama. Llamas can be over 6 feet tall and weigh about 400 pounds. Their long banana-shaped ears stand straight up and their hearing is excellent. Many predators have eyes that focus straight ahead. Animals that are their prey, such as llamas, often have wide-set eyes. Large eyes on either side of their head give llamas a wide view of what is happening around them. Llamas come in different colors. The most common are brown with yellow or white spots, but they can also be black, gray, and white. Llama wool is tough and strong. It's great for making rugs, warm clothes, blankets, and ropes. Let's see what Jack has to say at the top of page 34. Llamas in the Andes are usually sheared or shaved once a year. Great feat. Like most animals living in the mountains, llamas have special ways of dealing with the environment. They're able to move easily up and down the rocky mountainsides. Instead of having hooves like goats or horses, llamas have feet with 2 toes on each foot. Wide pads, much like a dog's, cover the bottom of them. The pads make it possible for the llamas to feel the ground under their feet. Because llamas have soft feet, they don't damage the soil or plants as cattle do. Jack says llamas are gentle on mountain plants. And Annie says a hiker wearing heavy boots does more harm. Now, let's look at this diagram of a llama. We see this tube that is approximately where their throat is. That's the esophagus. Then you see their teeth. Compartment number 1, which is the top part of their stomach. Compartment number 2. Compartment 3. And their small intestine. See what Annie has to say on the left. The esophagus is the tube that connects the mouth to the stomach. Diet. Llamas don't need as much water as cattle and sheep. Much of the water they get comes from the grass and shrubs that make up their diet. Llamas have stomachs with 3 separate compartments. When they eat, the food goes down their esophagus, into the first compartment. The partly chewed food comes back up into their mouth as cud. Cud is food that has been partly digested. More chewing breaks down the food until it's soft enough to fully digest. Llamas chew their cud about 8 hours a day. Behavior. Llamas are herd animals that like company. Let's look at what Jack and Annie have to say right here. Jack at the top right of page 37 says, cows, deer, goats, sheep, and giraffes digest their food the same way. And Annie says underneath this picture, llamas often live in groups of 20 or more. Now we're at the last sentence on page 37. In fact, when a llama lives alone, it gets lonely and tries to connect with other animals. Sheep farmers have found that male llamas make good watchdogs. If there are no other llamas around, they bond with the sheep and guard them against predators like coyotes and mountain lions. Sheep farmers usually only have one llama at a time with their flocks. If they used two, the llamas would hang out together and they would ignore the sheep. In Switzerland, this llama protects the sheep from wolves, says Jack. Let's look at the top right. What does Annie have to say? Annie says, as a mother gives birth, all the females stand guard to protect her from danger. And in the picture right here, we see a caption that says, a cria nursing. Crias. Llamas live to be about 20 or 30 years old. Females don't often mate until they are 3. About a year later, they will have a baby llama called a cria. Crias usually nurse until they're about 6 months old. Newborn llamas weigh over 25 pounds. They begin to walk and nurse when they are just a few hours old. Communication. Llamas have several ways of communicating. They often make humming or clucking sounds. A mother llama hums to her baby to let it know she is nearby. If llamas sense a predator, they warn the others with a high-pitched call or scream. If a llama stands very straight and holds its head up high, it is on the alert for trouble. And if it folds its ears back and flat, then watch out. It might start spitting. If llamas are mad, they spit at each other. They spit at other llamas to tell them to back off. And sometimes they aim at humans. Llamas can hit a target 10 feet away. It's a bad idea to annoy a llama, but if you do, stand back at least 11 feet. Actually, you better make it 12. Most llamas are gentle, intelligent animals that are comfortable around people. If someone overloads them, they don't spit, kick, or bite. Instead, they lie down and simply refuse to get up. Here's what Jack has to say at the top right of page 41. People attach colored threads to llama's ears to identify it. Llama owners say it is easy to train llamas. They're fast learners and curious. If you ever get near a llama, it might walk over to sniff your face. This is how they get to know other llamas as well. Because llamas are so important to them, the Aymara people of Peru and Bolivia call them their silent brothers. The ancient Incas honored these valuable animals by creating beautiful llama statues made of pure gold. How to meet and greet a llama on page 42. There are llama farms everywhere. If you visit one, it's good to know how to greet a llama. First, let the llama come up to you. Don't be noisy or wave your hands around. Don't sing or whistle, jump up and down. Move slowly, and don't stare right into its eyes. The llama might feel threatened. If the llama feels comfortable, it will sniff your face to get your scent. Otherwise, it will back away. Don't pat its head if it stays near you. Just try softly touching it on the sides of its neck. We're on page 45. This is chapter 3, Animals of the Andes. At least 1,000 kinds of animal species live in the Andes. Many are not found anywhere else in the world. These animals live in specific habitats that are best for them. Some prefer wet, warm areas, and others live in high deserts. Many guanacos, for example, live in the dry plains of the central Andes. They roam the treeless plain, eating scrubby grasses while staying away from the rocks and cliffs of the high mountains. Foxes, skunks, and eagles also prefer this habitat. Llamas and alpacas thrive at high altitudes. Medium-sized taruca deer also prefer high altitudes. People have spotted them grazing at over 16,000 feet. When the weather gets cold, they head for lower ground. Chinchillas also come from the high Andes. Their relatives appeared about 41 million years ago. Let's see what Annie has to say on page 46. This is located right above this picture of a chinchilla. Today, many people keep chinchillas as pets. They have thick fur to protect against the cold. In the wild, chinchillas jump from rock to rock. They can jump as high as 6 feet. Another animal that exists at high altitudes is the beautiful Andean mountain cat. This small cat often lives alone in the high, dry parts of the mountains. The cats are rarely seen, and researchers know little about their habits. They are an endangered species. Only about 2,500 remain. Unlike other animals of the Andes, no Andean mountain cats are living in captivity. Most people think pink flamingos only live in wetlands and lakes where the weather is warm. Some of the most beautiful flamingos, however, live in the cool wetlands and lakes of the Andes. On page 48, we see a caption of Andean flamingos. Huge flocks of as many as 1,000 Andean flamingos poke around in the lakes and wetlands looking for algae to eat. They can survive at over 11,000 feet, but move to lower ground when it gets too cold. An amazing frog, as small as the tip of your thumb, has been discovered in a cloud forest in Ecuador. What's truly strange about this tiny creature is that it can change its skin from spiky to smooth in only a few minutes. This quick change helps the frogs disguise themselves when danger approaches. Come on, let's look for more animals in the Andes. Jaguars. Jaguars are the largest predators in the Andes and throughout North and South America. Only lions and tigers are bigger. Jaguars have markings that look like a leopard's. These powerful animals can be 9 feet long, including their tail, and weigh up to 300 pounds. Jaguars are meat eaters that can take down animals weighing much more than they do. This is possible because their jaws are stronger than a lion's. In fact, a jaguar's jaws are so powerful that they can easily bite through a tough hide of a crocodile. Jaguars often live near swamps and in areas with trees. They can swim across rivers and lakes. Their great swimming skills help them catch turtles and fish that they sometimes eat underwater. Spectacled bears. The cloud forests of Peru are home to the rare spectacled bear. These medium-sized animals are the only bear in the Andes. They are very shy, so people almost never see them. Spectacled bears have white or light tan fur on the sides of their nose and above their eyes. They got their name because they look as if they're wearing spectacles or eyeglasses. The bears build platforms made of vines and branches high in the trees. They eat and sleep there most of the day. Although they sometimes eat meat, they mainly live on plants. If they get really hungry, they'll even eat cacti. Andean condors. Condors are the largest flying birds in the world. They weigh about 33 pounds and have a wingspan around 10 feet across. Condors live at altitudes of 9,000 to 16,000 feet. Condors can travel 120 miles a day. Because their bodies are so heavy, they save energy by soaring along with the wind currents. Condors belong to the vulture family and eat the meat from dead animals. They can eat several pounds and then go days without any food at all. The Incas believed that these great birds were messengers from the gods. Pumas. Puma is another name for mountain lions or cougars. They live in both North and South America. Pumas are the 4th largest cats in the world. They are almost 8 feet from the end of their tail to the tip of their nose. Pumas prey on large animals like deer and livestock. Since they can run 50 miles per hour and can jump 15 feet, they are deadly predators. When pumas make a kill, they usually eat part of it and save the rest by dragging it under leaves or sticks. Pumas and condors often fight over the leftovers, and a lot of times the pumas lose. Vizcachas. Vizcachas look like fat rabbits with big bushy tails. They're actually rodents like hamsters, mice, and rats, and are closely related to chinchillas. They live in colonies and have their burrows in the rocks. Vizcachas are social and communicate their feelings through sound. They grunt, squeal loudly, moan, and at times make noises together in a chorus. If a predator comes around, the animals make a whistling noise that sounds like a bird call. It means hide. To hide, vizcachas can jump quickly from rock to rock. They are so fast that predators have a hard time following. Andean hairy armadillos. Because this animal looks like a small knight in armor, the Spanish called it an armadillo, which means little armored one. An armadillo's armor is the bony shell on its back. In the Andes, armadillos sprout hair from beneath their shell and on their bodies and legs. They have strong, short legs, but these short legs help them run at speeds of up to 30 miles per hour. Armadillos use their sharp front claws to dig burrows and tunnels. Some are so wide and deep that they ruin the foundations of houses. Millions of years ago, ancient relatives of armadillos were huge, 10 feet long and weighing a ton. A ton is 2,000 pounds. Just think of what their burrows were like. We're on page 63, chapter 4, the Incas. People have lived in the Andes for thousands of years. Early Andean people practiced their own customs, languages, and religions. Although some lived in cities, most were farmers growing crops on the steep mountain slopes. They raised llamas and wove their wool into beautiful clothes just as many Andeans do today. A people known as the Incas settled in the Cusco Valley of Peru. Inca legends say their ancestors first came to the valley about 800 years ago. They made the city of Cusco their capital. Let's see what Jack and Annie have to say on the left on page 64. Jack says at 11,000 feet, Cusco is high in the mountains. And Annie says at the bottom that that's about the distance between New York City and Sacramento, California. With the help of a skilled army, the Incas defeated most of the tribes in what is now Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Ecuador, and Argentina. They took control of the land and ruled the people who lived there. By 1500, the Inca Empire was very powerful. From his palace in Cusco, the Inca Emperor ruled about 40,000 of his fellow Incas and up to 12 million people from other tribes. The empire stretched over 2,500 miles and was one of the largest empires in history. Let's see what Jack has to say on the bottom of page 65, above the picture. Today's Cusco Plaza de Armas is a popular place for tourists and Peruvians to gather. Language. The Incas spoke a language called Quechua. Quechua became the official language of the empire, although many people in the southern part spoke Aymara. Quechua is still one of the three main languages in South America, along with Spanish and Portuguese. More than 7 million people speak some form of the language. Let's see what Annie has to say on page 66 on the left. Lima is the capital of Peru today. Cusco. Mountains surround Cusco. This was where Inca nobles, their servants, and other workers lived. During the Inca Empire, about 40,000 people lived in Cusco. Cusco was a beautiful city with narrow streets. There were fountains, palaces, temples, and shrines. Water from 2 rivers filled the canals that ran through the city. Most of Cusco's buildings were made of stone blocks. Many weighed several tons. In fact, there are huge stones in a fortress near Cusco that weigh over 100 tons. The buildings were strong because the Incas were very skilled stone cutters. The stone blocks and buildings and walls fit together perfectly without cement or mortar to keep them in place. Let's see what Jack has to say underneath the picture on page 67 at the top. The fortress is called Sac-Se-Human. Workers build ramps to move the stones into place without any modern tools or equipment. Using only simple hand tools like stone hammers, the Incas managed to create very strong buildings that remained standing during many powerful earthquakes. Annie says at the top of page 68 at the top, Inca noblemen wore big gold ear ornaments. The emperor and his government. People believe the Sapa Inca, or emperor, had a special link to Inti, the sun god. Everyone obeyed the emperor without question. Because of his connection to the sun, the Inca nobility called themselves children of the sun. Let's see what Jack and Annie have to say on page 69. Jack says on the right side of page 69, there were male and female priests. And Annie says at the bottom, the emperor and empress were carried around on litters like this. Now we're at the top of page 69. The emperor had many wives, but the main one was called the Koya. She and the emperor worked closely together, building palaces and managing their estates. The Koya was in charge of special religious houses where women priests lived. In the main sun temple in Cusco, specially chosen women slept in a room with a statue of the sun. They put clothes on the statue, cooked food for it, and took it out on the patio every day. We're on page 70. The emperor and his family lived in a splendid palace. They ate and drank from gold and silver plates and cups. Each new emperor built his own palace. Inca emperors wore beautiful clothes and jewelry made of fine gold and silver. Even the women's hats had gold trim. There are stories that the emperors wore their clothes only once and then had them burned. Great weavers. In Cusco, women priests, known as mothers, lived in special houses called the Houses of the Chosen Ones. The Incas chose beautiful girls to be trained by the mothers. The women taught the girls how to weave and prepare food and drinks for religious ceremonies. The mothers were such expert weavers that they were the only people allowed to make the emperor's clothes. Jack says at the top of page 71, this Inca poncho shows the complex patterns of the weaving. Mothers were such expert weavers that they were the only people allowed to make the emperor's clothes, ceremonies, and funerals. When there was an important ceremony, the emperor sat on a great throne on a raised platform. After an emperor or empress died, their body was mummified. At the funeral, people danced and told stories about how great they were. Afterward, the priests returned the mummy to the palace. They burned food on special fires for the mummy to eat. Servants sat next to it, waving fans to keep the flies away. Annie says when there were parades and festivals, people carried the mummy through the streets. Managing the empire. The emperor spent much of his time caring for the empire. In order to control his lands, he divided the empire into 4 areas. His closest male relatives were in charge of the different sections and reported back to the emperor. Jack says at the top of page 74, Llama caravan on the move. And on the left, Annie says some ancient Inca roads still exist today. And if we look on page 75, we see Jack and Annie, and then Annie says, the emperor commands you to bring more fish to his palace in Cusco. On page 74, the empire was connected by more than 14,000 miles of roads and hundreds of bridges. Llama caravans often traveled the roads carrying goods all over the empire. It wasn't unusual to see 100 llamas or more in a caravan. Government officials traveled the roads as well. Because they were in service to the emperor, there were lodgings for them along the way stocked with food, clothing, and water. Mail delivery. When the emperor sent messages to different parts of his empire, teams of young men who were skilled runners acted as messengers. The men lived in the same shelters along the road that government workers used. Since the Incas had no writing, the runners memorized the messages. One runner would run 6 to 9 miles from his hut to the next and pass the message to a runner there. A team of good runners could cover 150 miles a day. Keeping records. Incas didn't have a written language. Specially trained officials recorded information on quipus. These were cotton or wool cords with more colored strings attached to them. The strings were tied into knots, which acted as a kind of code that stood for numbers. Jack says some animal quipus had over 1,000 strings. We're at the top of page 77. The government used quipus to keep track of things like how many llamas and alpacas there were in an area or how many potatoes were in a warehouse. Annie says on the right of page 77, 4,000 priests lived in the temple. Temple of the Sun. The most important building in Cusco was the Temple of the Sun in the center of town. The 4 main roads in the empire came together nearby. The walls were lined with gold and silver. The roof straw was coated with gold so it would shine brightly in the sunlight. The temple had incredible gardens with sculptures of flowers, insects, corn, birds, and other animals. Some stories told about gold statues of llamas in the gardens. The temples must have been an amazing sight. Jack says at the top of page 78, this gold figurine of a llama shows how important llamas were to the Incas. Gods and spirits. The Incas had many gods. Besides the sun god, others included the thunder god, the god of the rain, the earth mother, and the goddess of the moon. There were also spirits called apus that were connected to the mountains. The Incas believed that each mountain had a special spirit to protect the crops and animals. At night, the Incas looked at a constellation called Urchiloe. They imagined Urchiloe looked like a llama of many colors and took it as a sign that their animals were protected. An Inca myth said that llamas once spoke to 2 shepherds to warn them that a great flood was coming. The shepherds took their families and animals high up into the mountains. It rained for months, but then the sun god appeared and the sun returned. Ever since, the myth claims llamas have lived high in the mountains to keep themselves safe from floods. Annie says on the left of page 80, a drought is a time of very little rain. The Incas held religious festivals and feasts to celebrate a good harvest, especially of corn. They also had them for protection from earthquakes, floods, and droughts. Some festivals lasted for days. One of the most important was held on the shortest day of the year. Inca farmers. Most Incas lived in small villages. They shared the land and worked together, growing beans, quinoa, squash, and fruit. They also raised corn and many kinds of potatoes. There were warehouses all over the empire where the emperor had them store food, wool, and other supplies in case of an emergency. The Incas had a way of drying potatoes so that they could eat them later. They also dried meat to preserve it. The Quechua word for dried meat is chacari. Jack says on the left of page 82, we get the word jerky from the ancient Incas. And Annie says on the left of page 82, people used stone stairways to get from one terrace to another. Besides llamas and alpacas, the only animal farmers kept were Muscovy ducks and guinea pigs. Many South Americans eat guinea pigs today. The sides of the mountains were so steep that it was hard for crops to grow there. To solve this problem, farmers dug long, flat steps called terraces across the slopes. They filled them with dirt, sand, and gravel. Stone walls supported the terraces and stopped the crops from washing away. To give plants enough water in the rocky, thin soil of the Andes, people built miles of stone canals that carried water to the fields. Jack says underneath the picture of the terraces on page 83, the terraces' stone walls stored heat during the day and kept plants from freezing at night. End of the empire. In the 1520s, Spanish explorers arrived bringing diseases that killed many Incas, including the emperor. For 4 years, the Incas fought with each other for control of the empire. In 1532, the Spanish killed a new emperor and attacked Inca towns and forts. By 1572, Spain had conquered the once great Inca Empire. It lasted just over 100 years. The Incas had created a great nation and a strong government without the use of wheels, horses, riding, or machinery. Over the years, ruins of Inca buildings remain hidden in the mountains, smothered by jungle vines and worn away by time. Page 86. Potatoes and clay. For thousands of years, people in the Andes have eaten different kinds of potatoes. Some of them taste bitter and used to make them sick. It turns out that certain wild potatoes have natural toxins in them. Researchers were curious to know why natives from the high plateau areas of the Andes ate their potatoes with a sauce called choco. It is made of water, salt, and clay. They analyzed the clay and found that it contained minerals that pulled out the toxins from the potatoes. People in the Andes learned to soak potatoes to get rid of the toxins and the bitter taste. Some Andeans still practice the old way of eating their potatoes with choco. Chapter 5, Machu Picchu. In 1911, an American history professor and explorer named Hiram Bingham arrived in Cusco. Hiram was loaded down with cameras, tents, maps, and notebooks. He had come to find the lost Inca city of Vilcabamba, the last city held by the Incas before their defeat by the Spanish in 1572. No one knew exactly where Vilcabamba was. Before the Spanish attacked, the Incas burned much of the city to the ground. Hiram had heard that its ruins might be in the mountains outside Cusco. The adventure begins. Hiram and his team set off, first on mules and then on foot. He was in awe of the towering mountain peaks, canyons, and thick jungles. The men camped beside the roaring Urubamba River. And on page 90, you see on the left, Hiram Bingham, 1912. That's a photograph of him. Annie and Jack, what do they have to say on page 91 on the right? Annie says Machu Picchu means old mountain in Quechua. And Jack says the fertile ants is the most dangerous snake in South America. Okay, the adventure begins. Hiram and his team set off, first on mules and then on foot. He was in awe of the towering mountain peaks, canyons, and thick jungles. The men camped beside the roaring Urubamba River. And I know I just read that, but it's important that we have continuity from one page to the next. A farmer named Melchor Ortega told Hiram about the ruins on top of a nearby mountain called Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu. Hiram hired Melchor to guide him up the mountain. He grabbed his camera and tied thick cloth around his leather boots for protection against a deadly snake called the fertile ants. When the men left camp, it was pouring. They struggled up the mountain for about 2 hours until they came to a simple hut where a farm family lived. People there welcomed Hiram with some sweet potatoes and cool water. The farmer told his young son to take Hiram up the mountain to Machu Picchu. Annie says at the top of page 92, Hiram Bingham took this picture of the outer wall of Machu Picchu. That's a photograph at the top of pages 92 and 93. Jack says 10-foot tall stone walls support the terraces. The boy guided Hiram as they clambered up the slippery, steep terraces covered in vines, trees, and moss. As they got close to the top, Hiram had counted at least 100 terraces connected by stairways. Machu Picchu. When he got to Machu Picchu, Hiram saw the vine-covered ruins of buildings made of granite. Many of the roofs had fallen in, but he could see that this had once been a magnificent place. He took notes on the temples, fountains, palaces, and houses. Hiram later wrote to his wife, saying that Machu Picchu was so beautiful it took his breath away. Hiram stayed at Machu Picchu only one day. He left feeling absolutely certain he discovered the lost city of Vilcabamba. He was wrong. Returned to Machu Picchu. Hiram returned to Machu Picchu in 1912. With him was a team of archaeologists, and other workers. Archaeologists learn about people from the past by studying things they left behind like buildings, tools, jewelry, and human remains. When they reached Machu Picchu, workers began hacking through the thick jungle vines, cane, and trees to see what was underneath. In all, it took 4 months to clear the growth that covered the site. At last, Hiram and the team saw where narrow streets, temples, palaces, and houses had been. The men made maps, and Hiram took about 200 pictures. And he says that this is one of Hiram's photographs of Machu Picchu after all the work. Stonework. The Incas used stone that was already there to build Machu Picchu. But teams of Inca workers also pushed large boulders up the steep mountain slopes. Then they chiseled or carved them into the shapes they needed. The stones fit together so perfectly that even a thin knife blade couldn't be pushed between them. Vilcabamba or what? Once again, Hiram left believing that he'd found Vilcabamba, the great lost city of the Incas. Today we know that the ruins of Vilcabamba lie deep in the jungle, about 100 miles west of Cusco. The strange thing is that Hiram had actually seen these ruins before, but didn't think that they were important. Hiram wrote about his adventures. He believed that for the rest of his life, Machu Picchu was Vilcabamba. But, thanks to his writings, people all over the world learned about the wonderful hidden world of Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu after Hiram. Researchers have spent many years studying Machu Picchu. They've discovered much more about the site. They've even made 3D computer models of it. We see a caption at the bottom of page 97 that says, "Terraces at Machu Picchu." Jack says there were bathhouses and a prison among the buildings. Machu Picchu is truly a place of wonder. It sits almost 8,000 feet above sea level. There are over 600 terraces and about 200 buildings. Among them are clusters of houses, temples, and plazas. And there are lots and lots of steps. The main street is one long staircase. There are also 100 other stairways. In all, Machu Picchu has 3,000 steps. 16 fountains bringing water from a stream were spaced up and down the main stairway. People filled pitchers from them. In 1990, workers cleared dirt from a fountain and a canal. They were startled that after so many years, water flowed out of both of them. On page 98, on the left, we see this photograph has a caption that says, "Fountain from Machu Picchu." Page 99. What was Machu Picchu? Archaeologists say that Machu Picchu wasn't really a city at all. Some think it was a summer retreat or vacation spot where the emperor or other nobles got away to relax. Other archaeologists believe it was for religious ceremonies. Only about 300 to 1,000 people ever lived in Machu Picchu. Many were nobles, highly skilled workers, or servants. After the Spanish destroyed the empire, the Incas abandoned Machu Picchu forever. The buildings fell into ruins and were swallowed up by the jungle. Today, Machu Picchu is a popular place to visit. No one lives there, and when the tourists go home at night, the llamas and alpacas have this ancient place all to themselves. Hiram takes precious objects. Hiram got permission from the government of Peru to take thousands of objects from Machu Picchu back to the United States. Among them were broken bits of pottery, tools, and the skulls and the bones of bodies he discovered in tombs. Hiram sent everything he found to Yale University where he was teaching. Yale put them in its museum. It is now against the law to take objects from ancient sites. Peru asked Yale to return the objects Hiram had taken. By 2012, the university had sent them all back. They had been out of Peru for 100 years. Today they're in a museum in Cusco. Chapter 6, The Old and New. Page 103. In the Andes today, the old and new lived side by side. In fact, the past and present fit together as tightly as Inca stonework. About 1/3 of the people in South America live in the cities and villages of the Andes. About half of the people living in the Andes have Inca ancestors. Quite a few of them live very much as their relatives lived. Page 104. Farming today. Farmers still grow many of the same things. Potatoes are their biggest crop, but the tomatoes we eat today began as wild tomatoes in the Andes thousands of years ago. Almost every supermarket in the United States sells quinoa. People in the Andes cultivated it 5,000 years ago. Quinoa is rich in protein, vitamins, and minerals. Most farming families are Christian, but many still make offerings to the earth and pray to the mountains as their Inca ancestors once did. Farmers are bringing back the old Inca way of watering their crops. The government of Peru has begun a program to restore the canals and terraces that Andeans built 3,000 years ago. We're at the top of page 105. The Andes are so steep that farmers still can't use most modern farm machinery. But llamas and alpacas are no longer the only large animals on the farms. Some have begun raising cattle and sheep. If we look at the photograph, we see Torres del Paine National Park. Tourists flock to the Andes. People often take vacations in the Andes. Cusco has over 3 million visitors a year. Many come to visit the Inca ruins. There are national parks where hikers can see unique animals and plants. Mountain climbers tackle some of the highest peaks in the world. Annie says at the top of page 106, underneath the photograph, Aconcagua is the tallest mountain outside Asia. Thousands of people climb Mount Aconcagua every year. The easiest route calls for 18 to 20 days of hard climbing. Machu Picchu and other ruins. Over the years, archaeologists have found ruins in the Andes that few people knew existed. It wasn't until 1969 that they began work on Vilcabamba and uncovered what was left of the palace. It had a huge main hall with 26 doors and many streets and stairways. Machu Picchu is now a national park. It is such an important place that the United Nations declared it a World Heritage Site in 1983. Visitors pay to get in. People must stay on the path so nothing is damaged, and they can only visit for 4 hours. Annie says some llamas and alpacas still live among the ruins of Machu Picchu. And there's a photograph of an alpaca or a llama that is in the photograph. Jack says World Heritage Sites, like the Statue of Liberty, are protected from destruction or change. Llamas today. People all over the world now own llamas. They're so popular they're in books, movies, TV commercials, and cartoons. Jack says that there are even llama pillows, clothes, and towels. Most llamas in the United States are pets, but some are also working animals. They can be guards or pack animals, and some people sell their wool, although alpaca wool is more valuable. Rojo. Llamas can also be trained to be therapy animals. Rojo is probably the most famous therapy llama ever. He visits hospitals, schools, and nursing homes in the Northwest United States. Because he's such a gentle creature, people feel good being with him. They call Rojo the world's most beloved llama. He even has his own Facebook page. When you think about the role that llamas have played in the history of the Andes, it's not surprising that people all over the world have heard about these incredible animals. After all, one of the greatest empires the world has ever known would not have existed without the help of llamas. On the right, we see a photograph of a llama and someone who lives in the Andes. And on the left, we see Annie, who has something to say to us. That is, people getting married outdoors in Oregon can rent llamas to be in their weddings. The end.